Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here this evening. Your presence, no doubt, is a measure of the affection, admiration, and your support for Dr. Ashwani Kumarji. But it's not just that. I do want to say here that the reason your presence is really important because it's a vindication of your engagement with the ideas expressed in this book, A Democracy in Retreat, Revisiting the Ends of Power. And those of you who haven't bought this book so far, I would urge you on your way out to do pick up a copy. Now the question is, in our democracy, we've been a republic for 74 years. Our constitution gave us, us Indians, the rights and privileges of being a secular democratic republic. But 74 years on, is our democracy in retreat? What indeed is the relationship between democracy and power? Is there a limit to the exercise of power in a democracy? And if the answer to that is yes or no, as some may believe, then who is going to draw these red lines? But without much further ado, I'd like to start this conversation with Dr. Ashwani Kumarji. Ashwani-ji, the abiding theme in your book, thank you so much. There are several abiding themes in this book, and the first one, of course, is about democracy and the democratic deficit that you talk about. You talk about certain authoritarian trends that have crept up in the exercise of democracy. But tell us a little bit more what you mean by that.
Well, I think there's a context to the book and there's a context to the themes that I have chosen. When in 2016, my term in Rajya Sabha came to an end, after a very long, satisfying, gratifying period in Parliament and in public life, and that life continues even today, I thought to myself that there has to be a larger purpose to life. I've been the law minister, that is the highest you could go in your profession. I've been a parliamentarian for 14 years, chaired every single committee, have been entrusted by the Prime Minister as a special envoy to Japan. Almost everything that I could have wanted in life or desired for myself was done. And I said to myself that for the remaining part of my life, I must have a purpose larger than the appellations of authority. And I said to myself, what could that purpose be? And there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that the larger public purpose of life, and certainly of someone in public life, should be the advancement of human dignity. That is why I wrote my first book on this subject, which was known as Human Dignity, A Purpose in Perpetuity. This book is a continuation or a sequel to the thoughts that I had expressed in that book. So when I talk about democracy, its relationship to power, of course, is given. But what I had in mind was relationship of democracy to dignity. Democracy is premised on inclusion, on fairness, on rule of law, on justice, not on seclusion, not on exclusion. And it is premised first and foremost on the equality of persons, on the concept of equality, which gives us dignity, which we share in common with all our citizens. So democracy and dignity are interchangeable. Why? Because the premise of democracy, if fulfilled, inevitably promotes human dignity. So in every country, in every situation where you see human dignity at a discount, you can immediately infer that democracy is declining in that country and vice versa. And therefore, the collection of articles in this book has one strand that runs throughout, that is advancement of human dignity and challenges to human dignity, and therefore challenges to democracy.
But these disturbing trends that, you talk about disturbing trends in the exercise of our democracy in the Republic today, and, for example, in the exercise of arbitrary power. Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, the examples galore of the of the arbitrary exercise of power. This is writ large in so many things that we are witnessing today. For example, the expulsion of members of parliament is in my view, a clear case of exercise of power in an arbitrary manner. I can understand you can hide behind a rule, and I can understand you can hide behind the plenary power of an institution. But the question is, constitutional democracy is premised on a benign exercise of power. The existence of power is one thing. Its exercise is a completely another thing. What legitimizes power is the manner of its exercise. And that is why we keep repeating day in and day out, whether somebody acknowledges its reality or not, or its truth or not, or its unreality, if I may say so. We are not only a majoritarian democracy, we are a constitutional democracy. That is why the theme that runs throughout the book, the other theme, is about the accountability of power.
Right.
To whom? Not to A or B, but to the discipline of the Constitution and to the spirit of the Constitution. The moment we see that spirit being violated, we know that our constitutional democracy needs protection.
Now, clearly you are an avowed constitutionalist. I mean, that's very clear from your writings, not just in this book, but otherwise as well. And yet, you don't give the Supreme Court, the Honorable Supreme Court, 10 out of 10 in its defense of the Republic. Why is that? Why do you think that the record of the judiciary is mixed?
I'm very pained to accept that reality. I have worshipped two gods. One is God above me, and the other is the courts, where I've spent all my life. And it has been my ambition, as Chief Justice Thakur would tell you, to be the Chief Justice of India. But that could not be. And the reason why, at one point of time, in 1986, I was given an offer to become a High Court judge, and I declined, only because by that time I had realized that the judges were so powerless. Poor people, they couldn't even defend themselves when all kind of hurtful innuendos were made against them because of their judgments or otherwise. But the record of the Honorable Supreme Court, by and large, I would say, has been a stellar record, in the sense that if the Supreme Court or our higher judiciary has earned respect and acceptability in the minds of the people, it is not for nothing. These courts have, at different points of time, come out with very profound judgments. I mean, Puttaswamy, Shreyas Sengal, Navtej Johar, all these judgments are outstanding judgments. But my problem with the court is that it does not enforce its own lofty edicts. Mm-hmm. And that is what Chief Justice Chandrachud himself has said in one of his judgments, that the point is to enforce the edicts that we give. Now, who is to enforce it? He's in the seat now. But I think the problem is, for example, take the case of, there are several cases. For example, one or two judgments during the time of pandemic were very disappointing. But another judgment, and that authored by Justice Chandrachud on the vaccination policy, was an outstanding judgment. So I think, like all institutions, no institution is perfect. The record of the Supreme Court is certainly a mixed record. And in terms of defending the liberties of people, its record in the recent few years has not been very elevating. And I'm very, very pained to say that. It hurts me to say that, because for me, the Supreme Court is a venerable institution, and I will always regard it as a venerable institution. But the truth is that some of its judgments are very disappointing. And for example, and I would also say that I think some of its judgments on its own power and the way it has exercised its judicial review power is, I think, a classic case in the exercise of stretched constitutionalism. For example, when you say you virtually rewrite the Constitution in the election commissioner's case, in the appointments of election commissioner's case, I know that the popular view is in favor of the judgment, or could be in favor of the judgment, but as a constitutionalist, I don't agree with that judgment at all. Its premises are flawed. It amounts to virtually rewriting the judgment against the will of Parliament, and it brings you in conflict with another great institution of democracy. After all, we can't forget, whatever the aberrations may be, but Parliament as representative of the will of the people is the supreme democratic institution. I'm not saying that Parliament can't go wrong or parliamentarians don't go wrong. I'm not saying that. But for that matter, judges are also not infallible. They also go wrong. And that is proved by the fact that so many of the Supreme Court judgments have been corrected by the court itself at a given point of time, deferring to the wisdom of a future day. So I think the great glory of Supreme Court as an institution has been that to a very large extent, it has kept hope with the people, but it has faltered. Mm-hmm. And when it falters, and when the aberrations come, speak through judicial decisions, they are enlarged because Supreme Court is supposed to be the ultimate guardian. I don't agree with that. I've said in my book, democracy is secure eventually only in the assertion of the people through mass mobilization by leaders helmed by leaders who can rise above themselves.
Justice Lokur is smiling at your observations. But I do want to draw the attention of the audience to another very interesting theme in your book, which is that it's not possible always to lay the blame at the door of the ruling party or the regime in power. And you talk about the citizenry, people like us, like you and me, like all of us in this room. And what is it about us? What is it about our responsibility to stand up to this arbitrary exercise of power, if you like? What is the responsibility that citizens must play, the role, that our duties?
I must answer this by telling you a true. It's not a story. It's a conversation, a brief 4-minute conversation that I had with late Shrimati Indira Gandhi when I was just beginning my career. This was immediately around emergency, around that time, 75, 76. I had gone to meet her as a part of the group of lawyers, and for some reason, I stayed back, and she gave me a private audience for 2 or 3 minutes, and she asked me, Ashwani, courts mein kya ho raha hai? So that was emergency days. There was a lot of resentment against the Congress party, and I said, Madam, courts mein to mahol theek nahi hai, log emergency ke khilaf hai. इंटेलिजेंशिया हमसे दूर जा रहा है, हमको इंटेलिजेंशिया को अपने नज़दीक करना चाहिए. She pondered for a moment and she said, and that was not derogatory, it was exactly how she felt, what her experiences were. She was not, Mrs. Indira Gandhi was never derogatory to anyone. She said, तुम उस इंटेलिजेंशिया की बात करते हो जो वोट देने भी नहीं जाते. And I had no answer to that. It is true. When Dr. Manmohan Singh contested an election, in that election, Shrimati Phoola Devi won. Dr. Manmohan Singh lost. And I was in charge of one of the booths in Friends Colony, where there were 300 voters. By 3 o'clock, only 80 people had turned up to vote. And after those 80, 20, 30 would have voted for somebody else. So something that would have been his logical constituency. Even they didn't come out to vote. So therefore there is a failure, a collective failure on all our parts. People who think they know don't walk the talk. The challenge is that you have to walk the talk. People who talk of dignity must be willing to pay the price for their dignity. You can't defend somebody else's dignity if you can't defend your own. And therefore, at some point of time, not only in India, in most democracies of the world, the affluent and the intelligent somehow seem to be irrelevant in the processes, in the electoral processes of democracy. They may help in creating a consciousness, as we all try to do and we write. But the change will only come through massive political assertion and mobilization, and I repeat, by leaders who can rise above themselves. So the challenge is to find those few people who can show the way. निशाने राह दिखाते थे जो सितारों को, भटक रहे हैं किसी मर्द राहदां के लिए। जो कौमें, जो लोग सितारों को भी रास्ता दिखाते थे, हम जैसे हिंदुस्तान के लोग, आज भटक रहे हैं किसी राहदां के लिए। अबाउट डिग्निटी, इकबाल रोट, न तू ज़मीं के लिए है न आसमां के लिए, जहां है तेरे लिए तू नहीं जहां के लिए। God has created the world for man, not man for the world. और उसी का एक दूसरा बंद है, निशाने राह दिखाते थे जो सितारों को, भटक रहे हैं किसी मर्द राहदां।
You know, I'm going to come to the question of leadership in a second, but I do want to press you on the role of the citizenry. Now, 141 members of parliament have been suspended in the last few days, the highest ever in the history of our republic, of our democracy. Oh, so 143.
And still counting.
And counting, as Manoj said. And by the way, Manoj Jha is most eloquent when he announced in front of the press and of course outside Parliament, when he said, "I am suspended," and I think he says, and he wears it as a badge of honor. But the question to you, Ashwani ji, is that 143 members of Parliament have been suspended. You would have thought that people would be out in the streets. You would have thought that political parties would lead protests, and they would be out on the streets, not just in Delhi, but across the country. Why do you think this hasn't happened, or it's not happening?
We as a nation are a very tolerant people, you know. We wait till it is really reached a point where there is no way out. But I do believe that this episode has caught the attention of the people. And I think people will absorb it. But again, the question is that public memory is short. To keep these aberrations alive in the public mind is a function of communication. It is a function of leadership. Who will communicate what, when, and how? You can't speak of Harold Lasky and Habermas to the ordinary people of this country. But of course, you can summarize their thought in a manner that touches their heart. The chapter in Poetic Dignity of Public Discourse is all about it. How, in the freedom, during the days of the freedom movement, people like Josh Malayabadi, Akbar Alabadi, all those people, it was they who galvanized the nation through their poetry, through their articulation, understated, elegant, refined, not coerced by calumny and personalized vicious discourse. They said the right thing in the right language to the right audience at the right time, and it had an appeal much beyond 100 of these books that could be written and read. So therefore, the challenge of leadership today, the challenge of political parties, if I may say so today, is to find in their ranks leaders who can set the narrative of this country. The narrative of the country has been set, we all know. The alternative narrative is floundering somewhere in the air. We said 10 different things at 10 different times. And Manojji, one of the things which we discussed, and I feel very strongly about, because I think we'll be drawing to a close now, but I want to say that, you know, the opposition certainly has a right in a democracy to oppose, expose, and depose. But opposition also cannot claim moral superiority and intellectual superiority of judgment on all cases. It was wrong for the opposition to condemn the government during the time of the pandemic. Completely wrong. It is wrong, for example, for the opposition to find small pick holes here and there in foreign policy or in defense-related things. Maybe one's view may be different. I would have done it differently if I been the foreign minister. But when it comes to weighty issues of national security, weighty issues of foreign policy, you have to defer to the judgment of the government of the day. It may be any government. It could be A, B, C, D. I remember during Kargil war, I was the spokesperson of the Congress party. And I remember one of my colleagues, I won't name him, was very critical of Mr. Bajpayee. I went to Mrs. Gandhi and I said, "Madam, it is not sounding right. We are finding fault with the Prime Minister of a country which is at war, This is not, she said, I entirely agree with you. I have told these people so many times not to say these things, but they don't listen to me, and next day the damage is done. So, therefore, life must gravitate towards moderation. Democracy is about moderated politics. Collective politics, by definition, is moderated politics. If you don't gravitate towards moderation, you'll get the plot wrong. You cannot get it right. Even now I'm saying the country is looking to 2024. To get an alternative narrative on the ground and running is the challenge of leadership. It is not for us to decide. And that I don't know. I hope something will happen, but that's the challenge.
So, you also talk about the need to reach out to the opposition, for example, or the need to reach out to people who don't agree with you. So, in a sense, this language of our public life, whether it's in Parliament or outside, and the coarsening of our public discourse. You do refer to, of course, there is this chapter 31 in the book, which talks about putting dignity in public discourse. But I think just a general coarsening of our public language, whether it's on the part of the BJP or on the part of the Congress party, is something that we all decry. But tell us how this impacts on the life of a democracy.
The worst thing that you can do for your democracy is for political parties and their leaders to call each other names. हमारे यहाँ की एक संस्कृति रही है कि अंधे को अंधा नहीं कहते, उसको सूरदास कहते हैं. अंधे को अंधा कहोगे, उसको चुप जाती है बात. You say things, गालिब सेठ, हर एक बात पे कहते हो तुम के तू क्या है, तुम ही कहो कि ये अंदाज़े गुफ्तगू क्या है. अगर आपने हर in every sentence, if you are going to be abusive of your opponent, treating your opponent as a personal enemy, what chance does democracy have? There's no chance. And I mean, इस हमाम में सभी नंगे हैं. कोई एक पार्टी नहीं है जो ये क्लेम कर सकती है कि our discourse is very civilized. No. Now the question is, who provoked whom is another debate. But the point is, you can't fight certain people on their own turf. If you are claiming a qualitative distinction for your politics, you can't be into the competitive game of calumny. You can't be. And the moment you fall into that trap, you come at the same level. Your distinction is defeated. That is why I say that this chapter I wrote, Poetic Dignity in Political Discourse, I mean, there's every single sentiment that can be expressed in verse or in elegant prose or in an elegant speech. Do you have to abuse each other? I remember with great pain in my heart, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi brought me in politics. I have greatest respect for him. It was so painful to hear things said about him during Bofors, but now we are saying the same thing. We are doing the same thing again. How does that make us better? Have we learned from history? No. So the question is, people who refuse to learn from history are condemned by it. And therefore, a time has come when, in order to restore our cherished democracy to its strength, we need to rise above ourselves. We need to rise above our passions, our anger, our hurt. And all of these are absolutely natural sentiments. You are bound to be hurt if you're told wrong things. But then to expect from a hurt people not to react is also wrong. He will also react. So therefore, this unending spiral of venomous, coarsened political discourse is hollowing out the foundations of India's democracy. And that, Jyoti, is the challenge of leadership.
So what now?
What now is the last question. Well, सितारों से आगे जहाँ और भी हैं, अभी इश्क के इम्तिहान और भी हैं. I don't know where life is going to take me. I said the same thing when Thakur Sahab had released my 2 books. He has always done me the honor, and he's here. I'm deeply grateful to him. I said at that point of time, जब तक ज़िंदगी है, जब तक सफ़र है, जब तक जुस्तजू है, there is never a full stop. Where my destiny will take me, only God knows. But I do continue to believe that if God spares me some healthy years for the future, I will continue to be active in the public sphere. It may be in one form or the other. And I will continue to, I will try to spend more time in doing things I've missed out on, which is reading more literature and less hard politics. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a hand for Dr. Ashwani Kumar.